love Art Deco too. I have to say it's wonderful, wonderful time period. The last time period in history when pretty much white people controlled the world, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. Certainly doesn't. It's certainly not the case now.
And so, what? So, who was Johnny Mem?
Oh, he's just a saxophone player. All that was is just this black saxophone player was playing at the Champs Élysées in 1928, and it's just a poster. I don't know. When I got all the stuff, I just had someone go through and hang the various things in different rooms, and put the statues and all that kind of stuff around. So it's it's just the way it's been up there for 20 years.
An amazing time period. I mean, so that was when basically Black people from New Orleans, in large part, were coming to Paris.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't that amazing?
And that was probably about the time. When did Huey Long live?
That was precisely Huey Long's time.
Yeah.
He was elected commissioner of railroads, which was in charge of the oil industry in 1919, I believe. My great grandfather was one of his patrons, and pushed him in. And so he got control of the oil industry, and then he became governor. And another thing my great grandfather did was he very, very famously introduced him to the German consul, just a couple of blocks from where I live right now, on St. Charles Avenue and 8th Street. And at the old German consulate, the German consul gave Huey Long a famous pair of green silk pajamas with Hakenkreuz on it. and supposedly it was Long's favorite pair of pajamas. And my great grandfather spoke German, and he did a lot of negotiating to try to get basically foreign interference in American elections, I guess. That was
well, my grandfather was just a cotton farmer from Arizona. Yet I remember when I was a little kid, he was always talking up Huey Long, always promoting Huey Long. He really liked Huey Long, and he had no connection to Louisiana. He just farmed cotton in Arizona. But my family has always liked Huey Long. And one thing that struck me is when he died, he said, "I can't die now. I've got too much to do." And so it showed that he really didn't care about himself. He just wanted to achieve what was good for the Louisiana people.
And for the people of the United States. I mean, he originally supported Franklin D. Roosevelt in the New Deal, but he rapidly saw that the New Deal was a sellout, and that basically it was a sellout to the international bankers, quote unquote, and that it was that basically the bankers and the oil companies that he had been fighting in Louisiana were totally in bed together, and that they were going to strangle the American people. And yeah, it was an amazing time in history. And I mean, so many things were going on at that time period that are very poorly known. For example, there was a series of riots that were bordering on insurrections in Texas and Louisiana, and you never see them in the history books. I came across them about 20 years ago when I was doing some research on the writ of habeas corpus in Texas. And basically in the 1920s and 30s, the time of Huey, we were talking about Huey Long, people were being arrested and their published cases in connection with massive protests. And the Supreme Court of Texas at that time ruled several times that the arrests made were illegal, unconstitutional, because it took an act of the legislature of Texas to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, and that was how it entered the case law. And it's just amazing. Roosevelt managed to completely suppress all that dissatisfaction and make it look like the whole country was completely behind him. And if your father in Arizona was, I mean, I'm aware of stories from Oregon and North Dakota and Wisconsin of people who, and Illinois, who from people who, rural people like your dad, who were praying for Huey Long.
Yeah, I think that had he not been shot and killed by that guy, he might have been a contender to run against Roosevelt for the presidency.
Well, I hate to say it, that's probably why he was shot.
Yeah.
I mean, we all believe that down here. I mean, there are Louisiana to this day, you can get into heated arguments, at least with old timers. Old timers are people who grew up around old timers like me. You know, the people who are pro Long and the people who are anti Long. And basically, I mean, I assume you know who Hotting Carter is. And you know, people like that who joined the major league establishment, they are all anti-Long.
Yeah.
And the people who are actually in charge, you know.
Well, do you see some of Huey Long's personality in Donald Trump?
I hate to say it, no, I really don't.
I do. But,
oh, you do?
But coming from a different perspective, coming from wealth as opposed to coming from you know, barefoot and dirt floors, I still can see similarities.
Well, I sure hope you're right. I mean, of course, one big difference is Huey Long, when he was going through all this, was a very young man. And he was just, he was absolutely beholden to nobody. And Donald Trump, by contrast, is part of the establishment. And so it's sort of hard to really make that comparison because, wow, I mean, Donald Trump, he is rich because he worked with all these people.
Yeah, but I don't think he's part of the establishment. I think he runs counter to the establishment, and that's the very area that I see similarities between the two. He's fighting the establishment. In fact, he's fighting even as we speak. I think he's got this this rally going on in the town that I was born in, Florence, Arizona.
Florence, Arizona. Oh my goodness! How fascinating! Yeah. What's going on there? That's kind of interesting. What is the nature of the rally? Is it
well? We haven't heard him yet, but he's going to get up there and speak. He's going to speak for 2 hours on how the election was stolen and he should have been president.
Wow. Are you okay? You said you were sick yesterday. Don't die on us here. That would be very dramatic and probably you know, ratings would go through the roof if you died online, but we don't want it to happen. we aren't that desperate for a viral hit. Well, anyhow, Paul and I missed you last night. I hope you don't have COVID. We were talking about COVID. What have you got? Do you know?
Well, I don't know. I hope it's COVID because this cold is terrible, and as we all know, colds are worse than COVID is, and so.
By the way, how's my sound right now? I just realized my external mic wasn't right in front of me. Can you hear me?
Very good. It's okay. Very good.
Okay, good. Well, anyhow, golly, I have never even thought about comparing Donald Trump and Huey Long. That's interesting.
Well, they're both populists. You know?
Yeah, in that sense. But can you just elaborate a tiny bit more on that? Because I think
Huey Long fought the establishment very hard. Like you said, he fought the oil interest. He fought to get roads paved in Louisiana. I mean, Louisiana at the time when he was governor, or before he just became governor, there were no paved roads in Louisiana, probably, very few, and they didn't have schools, and the kids that were going to schools had to buy their own books. They couldn't afford books. They used slates. And in fact, well, actually, my mother, when she started school, she used a slate and chalk. They didn't have paper back then either. This was in Arizona. So I think he's very similar to Huey Long in that he is fighting the establishment and was trying to change the direction of Louisiana in the case of Long, and America in the case of Trump.
But I mean, Huey Long was very much of the people and from the people, and Trump definitely doesn't have that kind of background. I mean, Trump is a natural born elitist, isn't he?
Yeah, but he's as dumb as the people, and so in that sense, he's like us. So
that's a very interesting thing to say. I mean, from what I've heard through the family legends and through Louisiana history, Huey Long was not a dumb man at all. He was.
No, I'm saying that Donald Trump is of the common people because he's as dumb as the common people. That's what I mean. No, Huey Long was smart. I think he became a lawyer without going to law school. I think he studied in a law office.
With my great grandfather.
Your great grandfather tutored him in law?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
William Mallory. Anyhow, up north in Shreveport and Monroe.
Yeah.
That was where Huey Long was from.
I imagine the Canadians don't even know who Huey Long is.
Oh, yes, we do.
Okay.
But I mean, I do. I'm sure there are many who don't. But there was an unusual brief alliance that might really have done something. There was Father Coughlin with an amazing radio audience. There's Gerald L.K. Smith. I think he had a radio audience, and Huey Long. And then, of course, Huey Long was assassinated. And after endless pressure by Roosevelt, Father Coughlin was basically silenced and spent the rest of his life as with a very small following in a church, I think in Dearborn, just outside of Michigan. And Gerald L.K. Smith labored on into the 80s, I think.
He did. He was had a theme park.
Yeah. I've been very close to it in Northwest Arkansas.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that whole thing, the Christian nationalist movement, came directly out of Huey Long's power group. Now it was Roosevelt and Henry A. Wallace and Morgenthau who did everything they could to suppress that, and they said it was seditious and pro-Nazi, and all the things people say about us right now.
Yeah.
The world hasn't changed all that much, and yet here we are still fighting and hoping that we can, thinking of Christian nationals and Gerald L.K. Smith, the title, I've learned something about promoting this this podcast, by the way. I cannot have anything even remotely controversial or political in the title. That is the absolute key. You can't have words like Confederate or Supreme Court, Congress, elections. No words like that are the death. So basically, I mean, every title, just so you'll know, it has to be as innocuous as possible. I mean,
I know. Dining with the chefs.
To go back with your comparison, our discussion regarding Father Coughlin and Gerald L.K. Smith, Father Coughlin was Catholic, right? And Gerald L.K. Smith was Protestant, I'd imagine.
Yeah, very fundamentalist Protestant. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did they draw from two separate populations? Because I think back then there was suspicion among the Protestants towards the Catholics. And not vice versa. I think the Catholics were trying to get into power in America. But was there a problem with those two audiences?
There might have been a certain reservation, but they were united on the the political and economic goals of of reform along Christian lines. And
Well, did they work together, or were they two parallel groups?
I'm not. I think there was I believe there was coordination, but they were separate groups. Yes.
In the Christian nationalist movement that Gerald L.K. Smith put together, there was Father Coughlin had by that time been silenced, but there was a large Catholic contingent that joined that, and also from California, you had the white shirts, silver shirts, not white shirts, silver shirts. That was a mainly California group, and what I was going to say was that one of the things that Huey Long achieved in Louisiana is one of the few states in the Union, prior to mass Latin American immigration, that had a substantial native Catholic population because of the French and Spanish colonial period. The only other state really was Maryland of the early American states. I mean, Boston got the Irish and New York, but in Louisiana, you have the indigenous southern Louisiana is mostly Catholic, and northern Louisiana is mostly evangelical Protestant. And even in the city of New Orleans, you have downtown, the French Quarter and the Faubourg Saint Mary, which is now called the Central Business District, which is mostly Roman Catholic. Now here, where I am in the Garden District uptown, it was mostly Protestant. And so you've got a lot of very interesting lines drawn, but Huey Long basically built a coalition of the rural people from the Cajun area, the Catholic South, and the Protestant North. And so he was able to bring, that was one of the things, of course, that the German consul felt that Louisiana had in common with Germany, was that you had a Catholic South and a Protestant North. And they recognized that he had done very well in putting together an alliance where he had strong support in both sectors.
He was a strong supporter of the poor, rural white person. What did the blacks think of him?
They were not against him. I mean, they were, I hate to admit this, or I'm proud to admit it, I'm not sure, but they were largely disenfranchised, and they were not politically strong group at that point. But he was very much in favor of what would you call parallel development. And I don't know, have you ever met Geron Ames by any chance?
No.
Geron Ames you've been associated with some interesting black people. So I thought you might have run into Geron Ames. Geron Ames lives in New York City on the Upper East Side. Just celebrated his 90th birthday 2 weeks ago or something. And he was originally a jazz pianist from New Orleans. And I met him through, do you know Michael Santamaro?
Yeah.
Oh, I've heard his name. Yes, I've heard his name.
Okay. I met him through Michael Santamaro. And anyhow, Geron Ames was from a New Orleans family that had a world that I had never heard of before. The largest, his family owned, was a founding family and owned the largest black bank in Louisiana. And he's created this in his condo on the Upper East Side. He's created this island of New Orleans on Manhattan. And it's kind of fascinating because he has just perfectly replicated the French Quarter in an Upper East Side condo. And I said, well, you obviously love New Orleans and miss it. Why are you up here? And he said, well, I can't go back there. They destroyed everything. Who destroyed everything? The Jews, the bankers. Well, how'd they destroy it? What'd they do to you? You're black. I thought they were for you. Are you kidding? They made all banks part of the same system. They wouldn't allow us to deal only with black people. We had created Black neighborhoods where Black people could afford Black property. We were giving Black people a real opportunity, and they destroyed it, the Jews and the centralized bankers. And it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
Cataracts came off my eyes. I had been blind to that whole reality because I remember hearing, when I was in, teenager, that, there's more segregation in New Orleans than anywhere in the world, but on a map, it doesn't look, on a zip code map, it doesn't look that way because you've got one Black street and then one white street, one Black street, one white street. And you can still see the architectural differences now. The Black houses tend to be smaller, but now what's really funny is that they've got integration, and I hate to say this, people from California, who besides you has a California ID? Anyhow, never mind. People from California come over here, and they're paying $500,000 to $1 million for basically these houses that were formerly considered servants' houses.
Yeah. Well, talk about Black banks. My father was back. I can't say racially aware, since he was a little bit, but back then we didn't have the problem we had now, because when I was a kid, it was 90-some% white. But he was aware. He was supportive of what I'm doing, and there was I guess a prospectus coming around to promote the starting of a Black bank, and my father bought shares in it. And I was a little kid, and I'm asking why. He says, well, because we want to help them get a leg up. And so that mentality is typical of our people. Even though if we are aware of who we are, we're proud of our race, we want to support our own people, we will support other people to help them out. And that is what has traditionally been, I think, a good aspect of our nature, but now is auguring destruction for us.
Well, I mean, isn't it interesting? Because apparently the civil rights movement and integration destroyed the basis for this indigenous. I don't know what year was this that this Black bank was coming into existence?
This would have been in the 1960s.
So, okay, this would probably have been either the tail end of that independent period, or was it a Black bank that was coming? Do you know what happened to this Black bank?
I remember I was following it, and for years and years, it didn't do anything good. I mean, good, it just wouldn't go anywhere up or down, because it was, it was poorly managed, and they didn't do anything. But my father bought a few shares in it, and it probably ultimately dissipated and disappeared.
In Arizona, though, or
no? This was in Oregon. We, my folks, my mother's side and my father's side were both cotton farmers. In fact, my grandfather on my mother's side was the largest cotton farmer in Arizona. See, after the Dust Bowl, during the Dust Bowl, my mother's father was a cotton farmer in Oklahoma, and so when the Dust Bowl came about, all the Okies had to leave to go somewhere. My grandfather went to Arizona and became a huge cotton farmer there. Some of the people that were way not as good as successful as he was went to Orange County and became cotton farmers there, and the property in Arizona is worth the same now as it was when he moved in there. And the property in Orange County, all these the wealthiest people in California were Okies at the same time my dad was, my grandfather was. I grew up in Arizona, but then we moved to Oregon when I was in the 60s. We moved to Oregon.
Did you manage to hang on to any of that property in Orange County?
Oh no, we didn't. I didn't get any Oregon. My grandfather went to Arizona, and all of the people that were not as successful then went to Orange County, and now they became hugely wealthy. And the Johnson line or the Simmons line has nothing. Wow,
that's pretty amazing. So all of this goes to the question of diversity. What Geron Ames' position was that segregation was good. It was good for Black people. because it gave Black people a community that they could live in, and they didn't have to compete with white people. Rather. They didn't have to compete with white people. And that meant that basically Black people could be Black and white people could be white, and they wouldn't step on each other's toes. And it was the mixing, it was the forced integration that prevented that separate development from really coming about. And of course, you were asking where Huey Long stood on all this. Huey Long had nothing, no remote intention of ever dismantling segregation. And back in the 20s and 30s, nobody talked about dismantling segregation. It would have been not just political suicide, it would have just seemed like, probably grounds to commit you to an insane asylum. It still seems that way. But there are just a lot more people who are voting for the insane asylum. And I mean, my question always is, how do we get back there? How do we get back to a sane world where Black people can be Black people without us stepping on their toes or them stepping on our toes, or worse yet, them dating our kids?
Well, I think to talk about the merits and the demerits of segregation is kind of like talking about whether a hackney is better than a hansom. Which kind of horse-drawn carriage do you want to support? Because that's so passé. The issue now is white ethnostates versus versus other countries. We cannot have segregation. We can't have apartheid. We have to have our own country. And I don't want to go back to segregation. I want total and complete separation.
Step by step, inch by inch, tell me how we're going to get there.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this for 40 some years, and we're now beginning to see some progress. Before, it was just completely ridiculous to think that. Now there are a lot of people who think it is not so ridiculous. So, like you say, change is slow, but we're moving there. We start promoting it, and eventually we'll get there. But I mean, the thing is so many white people now have interracially married, and like you got just interracial marriage is just rampant. So then we need to take the remnant of white people that remain and build our own cultures. And a lot of things go to help us out. Like, for example, in California, there was a train robbery. We haven't had a train robbery in 120 years, but there was a train robbery. And if you saw the video, basically a bunch of Black people got on a slow moving train, opened up some of the containers and stole a whole bunch of flat screen TVs. So when people watch that.
What? They stole CDs?
Sorry, they sold flat screen TVs. And
flat screen TVs.
Flat screen TVs. And so
okay.
When you see the video of this whole conglomeration of Black people going onto the slow moving train, open up one of the containers, and then throw out just all these flat screen TVs, and you're just taking them. And what was revealing is they're taking them and putting them in new Chevrolet SUVs. They're putting them in new Toyota SUVs. So they're driving expensive cars, new cars, and they're stealing flat screen TVs. And so pretty soon people are going to think, America can't survive with this type of underclass. Then you see these videos about streets in France or streets in London or streets in Belgium where they are no longer European. And so that slowly will convince people. And so those of us who've remained true to our heritage and have white children, we will eventually be able to establish our own homelands. And notice I say plural, because we've got to have ethnostates. We can't just have one.
Paul, do you have a step-by-step scenario? Because I think, I'll just say what my step-by-step scenario is. My step-by-step scenario is we need to make alliances with Black Lives Matter and tell them that the only way we can guarantee the security that Black lives will matter is if we give you your own jurisdiction. And so we're going to have mini segregation first. And you're going to eventually like mini segregation so much that you're going to go to macro segregation. That's my scenario.
Well, I've been around the ethno-state discussion going back to maybe the early '80s with Wilmot Robertson's less well-known book called The Ethno-State. His best-known book, of course, was The Dispossessed Majority. But I guess what I see many problems. One of them being the absolutely poisonous influence of the notion of equality that has absolutely permeated permeated academe, permeated our legal system, and so on. Like I would imagine that segregation would be illegal in the United States.
It is totally illegal
Yeah.
by the letter of the law, basically by the Supreme Court. But if you could, it's. I think it's possible to sell it again. I think that the ethno state is almost too big because it requires too much reorganization. There's already de facto segregation in the United States. It's actually, New Orleans is more segregated now on a zip code by zip code basis than it was in the 60s and 70s, because basically uptown is 90% white. East New Orleans is 90% black. French Quarter's mixed and degenerate and disgusting.
Well, I believe that the whites have always promoted the interest of other peoples, just like my father bought shares of stock in this black bank. And so we've always tried to help raise people up. And I remember for generations, the blacks would say, blacks can't be racist, only whites can be racist. Only whites are racist, blacks aren't racist, because we don't have any of the vestiges of power to exercise control over other people. And even back then, I thought, well, that I can understand that argument. But nowadays, blacks can definitely be racist because they have more power than white people. They have power all over the place, and they are exercising racist actions and sentiments out in the open. Whereas the white people still try to promote other people's, the blacks are promoting their own, and the Hispanics and other races too. So then what's going to happen eventually, the white people are saying, hey, this isn't fair. We help them, they help themselves, they hurt us. They hate us, and they act that way. So eventually that will drive us towards segregation, separation, white ethnic states.
Yeah, I think we have to get a fair number of people on track with this. It's a matter of changing attitudes. We've had poisonous anti-white propaganda going probably at least since the Second World War, maybe even before that. Several generations have grown up basically despising themselves. That's one of the reasons I think you get to see so many big businessmen who are white and big corporations who are white actually giving money to these pathological white haters. Black Lives Matter. We need to radicalize a larger core of people who shed the idea of equality and who can focus on what is best for us. And as you rightly pointed out, every other race works for itself. I was flabbergasted 2 days ago to find out that a family I'm very close to, the mother passed away at age 98 in the summer, that she had been giving money to this African foundation, foundation in Africa for kids with cleft palates. Their ads are all over the TV. Some poor pathetic little Negro, with a cleft palate, he's going to be ostracized, and for only so much, the half-hour operation, he can be made whole again. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of need in North America, all sorts of need in the community this lady lived in the mountains of British Columbia, and to be writing a check, however modest, once a month to help Negroes with cleft palates. Where where you have to say, well, where's Oprah Winfrey? Where's Tiger Woods? Where are the very wealthy blacks helping other blacks? Well, they're not. They're helping themselves. We've got to uh, deal with that. But I think Kevin McDonald talks about pathological
Altruism.
altruism. I mean, altruism among our own people is a good quality, helping one another and so on. We've always done that, but we have people who feel incredibly altruistic for people they've never met, on the Dark Continent or other places, and yet would be loath to give a dollar to some homeless person who's got a coffee cup out seeking help, whether whatever you might think of begging. But we have got to try to resell white pride and white self-interest. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we really have that critical mass after which things begin to change, in my opinion.
In my opinion, what I think is more insidious than overt anti-white propaganda is the national obsession with the fear of being called racist. And if you just look at the television commercials and every ad, they don't want to represent a white family, a normal white family, because of fear of being called racist. So that's why you have so much mixed race in there. Yeah. And even if you have a white family, they'll have an adopted Asian child or whatever it is, because they don't want to promote a white family structure for fear of being called racist. So the destruction of Western civilization is because of that one simple thing: fear of being called a racist. And that, in that sense, we're not getting better, because I just read that now I think there's movement to make the concept of racism a mental disorder, and they're wanting to just do all sorts of steps to pound that down, so that whites cannot express any sort of racial consciousness at all. So I think what's going to turn the tables is when you have the other races, they don't buy into that garbage, and then we might end up following their lead. And I hate this, we all grew up being the whites were in charge of the world and Western civilization led everywhere, and now we hate to see that we're following other people's examples. But for example, you had George Lincoln Rockwell say white power, and he didn't come up with white power on his own. It was mimicking black power. And now we have white lives matter or blue lives matter. We didn't make that on our own. It's mimicking black lives matter. So I don't like the fact that we are mimicking other people's slogans, but maybe that's what's necessary when we finally realize that they are indeed racist, and that we might be able to follow their lead and make racism a legitimate concept
again. Yeah. It's sad that we are intimidated, maybe even ruled by a word that was dreamed up by a communist Jew, Lev Davidovich Bronstein or Trotsky, and it was a term he invented, the term racism to attack. I hesitate to say nationalists, but in the argument within the Communist Party in the USSR, there were two factions. One, let's concentrate on building communism here in Russia. The other faction, led by Bronstein or by Trotsky, was let's spread it throughout the whole world. And so he invented this term to smear his opponents. And unfortunately, through the tremendous penetration of academia and the media by the cultural Marxists, that's become a cuss word in the West. And then, which Bill was saying, the notion of somehow getting racism, whatever that means, because it's an infinitely flexible term. Black power, okay. Hispanic power, okay. White power, you're a racist. But getting that classified as a mental disorder, well, that's right back to the good old Soviet Union. If they didn't put you in the gulag, they tossed you in the nut house in Lubyanka, because you couldn't possibly oppose communism except unless you were paid to do it by the CIA, or you were crazy. Uh, and I mean, it's brilliantly evil if they actually succeed in getting racism, which everybody claims to be totally against, classified. Maybe we need to put our best minds to marketing. I got an idea that just occurred to me as Bill was talking. Um, um, Ads like, "I've overcome the fear. Do you want to?" And so you leave that up in the air. Well, what's that? And might lead you into the having my life ruled by this word. I may not express pride in my own heritage for fear of being called a racist. I don't want to be called a bad name, but I'm not going to alter my behavior so that I'm not called a bad name. I don't know, but we've got some very, very clever people, who are expert at marketing. Or first thing you have to do is you've got to interest people, and I think that's what we're all trying to do with these programs and other endeavors we're involved in.
Well, I mean, so basically, neither of you like my idea of trying to reestablish the white man's burden as a philosophy of of reconstructing white pride and white power.
No, I agree with
I like your idea. My only, I get, well, as you asked Bill a few minutes ago, how do you get there? How do you get there from here? That's, I guess, the problem that bedevils us all.
Well, I think we'll always have the concept of white man's burden because we are naturally industrious, or many of us are. We have the Protestant work ethic, and we excel in a lot of the things that we do, and we're innovative. So we will naturally come out on top in many respects, and we will influence the world.
Interesting thing you just said. We have the Protestant work ethic. Did the Medici's and the Farneses in Florence have the Protestant work ethic?
No, because they're not Protestant. Only Protestants have Protestant work ethic. Everybody else, they're excluded.
Well, I was endlessly fascinated by the Borgia story, and along the way, you picked up a lot about the Farneses and the families in Florence, and they certainly had something going. I mean, they were very clever, and they were just arch schemers, a lot of them. I mean,
I've heard of the Borgias, but what's the other name? The Farneses?
The
the
Farnese.
Farneses were a powerful Italian family. Well, one of their daughters, Julia Farnese, was a longtime mistress of the Pope, Rodrigo Borgia.
Okay. You sure it wasn't one of the sons that was the mistress of the Pope?
The sons, I get you.
They had good popes
Maybe
back.
not that Pope.
They had good popes back then. I mean, this is something I ran into in Mexico, and I thought it was the most hilarious thing on earth. In Mexico, I lived in some very small towns when I was doing archaeology, and I met a lot of the local elite, so-called Creole white people, especially in Yucatan, Durango, other states like that, and they explained to me that they couldn't understand anything about how there was all this worry about pedophilia in the Catholic Church of the United States, because they said we have a simple rule: when we're bringing in a new parish priest, we want to meet his mistress, and if he doesn't have a mistress, we don't want him.
Yes, but my father told me stories like that. he was in the oil business in Latin America, and he was very cynical about the dual vision of Catholicism. In much of Latin America, he said, really, it's a thin veneer of Catholicism, and much of the old, pre-Catholic or pagan past. It's a very thin veneer, and there's widespread hypocrisy. Just like what you're saying, every most parish priests had a girl on the side, which may have calmed them down and maybe made them better priests. That's of course heresy, but just my family's observations from a man who my dad was he spoke Spanish, so he could get along pretty well, and he survived the culture shock.
So is your family Catholic?
Yes.
What about your Charles?
Episcopalian.
Okay. All right.
Sometimes called Anglo-Catholic.
Yeah.
But no, we're Episcopalian back to the church that I go to was founded 175 years ago, and my family's been in that church ever since, or actually since about 40 years before.
And up here we would call you Anglicans.
Right. Yeah. In Canada, they call it the Anglican Church of Canada. But that's an interesting question, though. And I mean, when I hear Bill talking about white ethnostates, I can't help but think that his Mormon heritage has something to do with him believing this is possible. Because the Mormon movement in the 19th century was this amazing case of white people with different customs leaving the East and creating basically their own ethnostate in Utah.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess Idaho and adjacent parts of Arizona. And I just wonder, is there any real possibility of such a thing right now? I mean, to create a white ethnostate today, I mean, Rick Tyler talks a lot about trying to get a hold of one county or even a piece of land. And how difficult is that going to be? I have my own target. I keep thinking about the wonderfully named Dixie County, Florida. I like it because it's very low population. It's on the Gulf Coast, and I think it's important that the original ethnostate basically have a navy, sort of, right? I mean, international trade and things like that. And yet, what would it take to separate Dixie and a couple of other coastal counties in Florida? I mean, the 19th century was such an amazing time. I mean, I think last weekend we were talking about the Battle of New Orleans. And at the time of the Battle of New Orleans was a major city, and New Orleans was what Jefferson wanted, really, as far as the really valuable access to the Mississippi River. But to the southwest of New Orleans, there was Jean Lafitte's sort of pirate kingdom of Barataria Bay and Grand Isle. And he had an incredible lot of autonomy in what was basically the size of a very large county. And then to the northeast of here, in what they called the West Feliciana or West Florida parishes, at St. Francisville, they declared a Republic of West Florida at one point, which was the original Lone Star State. And things like that are they're inconceivable in the modern world. I mean, it used to be a several-day trip from one end of Louisiana to the other. And now it's barely a several-hour trip.
Well, I think as America begins to further polarize, and other countries as well, I mean, this concept of large nation states may be passé, just like the happy and the handsome are. We might be reverting back to city states. And in that sense, you can have a lot of little ethnic enclaves without an overseeing large government, except, I guess, China. They'll oversee everything.
I guess that's one of the fears I have, actually. That's precisely one of the fears I have, is that if nation states like the United States and Canada and major powerhouses like the United Kingdom and France and Germany, if these countries cease to exist and fraction, if they break apart, yeah, that leaves a tremendous power gap, because one problem is that the city of New Orleans today produces no food. And I think Los Angeles produces very little food. And I doubt if Toronto produces any food because of the climate. And so you're going to have an interdependence. There's going to be, there's going to be a necessity of trade. And if, for instance, I don't know, say Los Angeles were to, by some incredible miracle, become a white ethno state. I don't think that Los Angeles is one of the first likely places to where that could happen, but let's say it does. How will the people of Los Angeles eat? How will they have water without the cooperation of, I don't know, a Black population controlling the Colorado River, for instance?
Yeah, that might be a good point. However, you will have there is a very strong local grow movement, and you're right. If you don't have the water, you can't do it. But you have a lot of people who, like it's in Pasadena, a little tiny plot of land, they take out their front yard and they grow so much food there using the technology where you don't even need soil, you just have the water. I forget what the call it is. So yes, that's what it is. So there can be we can survive. It's like what was it called? Hank Williams Jr. A country boy can survive. Well,
country boy can survive. The idea that a city can't produce food is belied by the 19th century history of Paris. Paris was so good at gardens within the city that they were actively exporting, I forget now, but fresh fruits and vegetables to London, England. And that continues to this day. As you know, in a city in the 19th century, one of its major problems were the piles of horse manure, because most of the carriages were pulled by horses. Well, the industrious Parisians found good uses for them, that as manure, and they were it's very productive. And Paris, is in a relatively cold climate. It's not in the sunny south like, say, Marseille. There's something to be learned from that. But as to the vexing problem, how do we get there from here? Something that Pastor Tom Robb says, and it may not be original with him, but I've picked up the idea from him, is that gradually the heartland, which is a flyover country, roughly, the land between the two important parts of the United States, the important part being the East Coast corridor with Washington, Baltimore, Boston, New York, and then the important part on the West Coast, which would be the coastal cities of California, and maybe throw in Portland. But and in the eyes of the elite, these are the important places. Most of the rest is just flyover country. But there's a demographic movement of white people out of the east and the west and the coastal areas into the heartland. Now, of course, it's not totally perfect. You still have big cities in the heartland like Detroit, St. Louis, and Chicago, which have very, very large non-white populations. But there's a lot of area that that might, with rising consciousness, lead to something which would allow some form of ethno state or ethno states, maybe. Like the Mormon advantage in Utah, as far as I understand, Utah was virtually empty,
Right.
except for a few coyotes and eagles. and the Mormons came along and they basically took the state over.
And crickets, there are a lot of crickets.
Well, crickets, okay.
Okay, yeah, all right. That sounds good. I'm really getting exhausted.
You
Can
look
we-
that tired.
Yeah, can we? I'm still sick, and it's just the cold, not COVID.
Well, we certainly hope that Fauci accepts your definition for your own sake. And I mean, this is a really interesting topic because I happen to know that Los Angeles was one of the most fertile land spots in North America. They say that is underneath the concrete is basically the best soil anywhere in North America, but it's got to have the water. And all it's got that subterranean tar from La Brea, and I don't think there are many water wells in Los Angeles County. I heard somewhere that somebody in the 19th century said the maximum population Los Angeles County could ever sustain would be 300,000 people.
Don't want to take stock market advice from that dude.
Well, I mean, if it hadn't been for Hoover Dam, it might never have exceeded like 500,000 anyhow. But
right. But if you take a look of what white Western technology has done for Saudi Arabia and some of these other coastal countries, they have desalination plants.
Yeah,
are quite successful. If LA became its own ethno-state, we'd make do.
Let's talk about that next Friday. How about it? Let's all come up with ideas for what the white ethno state of Los Angeles County, California would look like. And maybe what's your county, Paul?
well, that's a good question. Wentworth County. See, I moved a few years ago. For my whole life, it was either York or Peel, but Wentworth County. Yeah.
Okay, well let's talk about what would it take to make our respective counties or parishes into white ethno states. That'll be our topic for next Friday and Saturday. How about it?
Sounds good.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Right,
and best of health, Bill. Best of health.
All right, thanks. Bye bye.
Hope you feel better. Happy Ides of January.
Okay.
Yeah.